If you're looking for something a bit roomier and a bit more premium than a Tiguan, but you don't need 3 rows of seating, you might be considering something like this 2024 Volkswagen Atlas Cross Sport. It has received a pretty significant interior and exterior refresh for this model year, and that means I now have to attempt to answer the question, has Volkswagen done enough to convince more shoppers that a Cross Sport could be right for them? Because as much as I've always liked the Atlas and the Atlas Cross Sport, neither one has exactly been a segment bestseller. To frame this discussion, we need to talk about the competition. In this segment, the 3 bestsellers are the Jeep Grand Cherokee, the Subaru Outback, and the Toyota 4Runner. But this is also competing against vehicles like the 2-row Santa Fe, the Chevy Blazer, the Honda Passport, Nissan Murano, and Mazda CX-70 coming soon. Like those vehicles, the Atlas Cross Sport is certainly focused on being more style-forward, a bit bolder than the smaller entries in the Volkswagen lineup, and of course, wider and longer as well. We have full LED headlights up front, quite distinctive, and actually some of my favorite LED headlights in this segment. But what's most distinctive is this big wraparound light bar and of course the standard illuminated Volkswagen logo. There is absolutely no confusing what is happening behind you when you see this in your rearview mirror. One thing you'll notice, no fog lights down below. That's because Volkswagen gives us their all-weather light integrated into this dual module headlamp right there. The front grille and front bumper look an awful lot like the Volkswagen Atlas because indeed a decent amount of the Cross Sport and Atlas are shared with one another, but in this model we don't have a chrome grille, instead we have the blacked out grille with very similar little tongue-shaped elements inside. Volkswagen used a time-honored formula to create the Cross Sport. They took the larger Atlas and then they chopped some inches off the back. This is 195.6 inches long, making it 5.2 inches shorter than the 3-row Atlas, and all of that room comes from right back here. They delete the 3rd row and then they push the back end further inward. Since there's no 3rd row and no need for 3rd row headroom, they gave us a slightly more raked hatch as well. Then they dropped the roofline a bit. It actually is 2.5 inches lower than the regular Atlas, but you'd be forgiven if you didn't notice it, and that's due to the proportions. Volkswagen wanted the proportions to remain about the same, and if they had left the roofline 2.5 inches taller, it might have looked strangely tall. So they lowered it down a bit, and you probably won't notice unless you park this right next to the 3-row model. From this angle, the lower roofline is definitely a bit more obvious, and part of that is again because they decided to give this a bit more of a raked profile in the rear, much less of an upright hatch like we find in the 3-row Atlas. The lighting in the back is basically the same, full LEDs back here, including LED backup lights and amber LED turn signals, which are definitely my preference. Not my preference though are these absolutely fake exhaust tips at the bottom, and for some reason I find it even more egregious that there are 4 fake exhaust tips. The real exhaust tips are actually tucked up under the bumper, and there are 2 of them. Volkswagen gives us nicely integrated parking sensors, however. They actually put some of the parking sensors in this red reflector strip and then some right there, and then we get these little sort of stripes back here to theoretically help clean up the air as it leaves the vehicle. Not the most important thing in a big SUV, mind you, but down here we also have a hitch receiver because this is rated to tow 5,000 pounds. That's another reason you might want to get a mid-sized 2-row vehicle like this over the average compact, is that the average compact is going to give you about 3,000 to 3,500 pounds of towing capability. Here we have 5,000. If you want even more, however, you're really going to be limited. You're basically looking at a Jeep Grand Cherokee because that's one of the only models that will go all the way up to over 7,000 pounds of capability, but you do have to pay quite a lot for that extra towing ability. Let me know what you think about this vehicle's boxy styling. That's definitely something that I've always been attracted to on the Atlas and the Atlas Cross Sport. 2024, of course, brings us some new wheel designs. This model has 21-inch wheels on it wrapped in 255 with tires. The base model is going to get slightly skinnier tires. They drop down to 245. There has been a bit of confusion on the ground clearance in the Atlas. Volkswagen now lists it at 6.3 inches, but interestingly, the approach departure and breakover angles are essentially the same as before, and that tells me that nothing really changed underneath the Atlas Cross Sport. They're probably just measuring from a different location. And try as I might, I could not find that location. In my own measuring, this comes in somewhere around 7.7 inches. I have asked for some clarification from Volkswagen on that. I haven't received it by the time I'm filming this video, so if I do receive anything by the time you're watching this video, you'll find that down there in the description. Volkswagen decided to simplify the engine lineup for 2024, so there's just one engine under this hood. It's a 2-liter 4-cylinder turbo producing 269 horsepower, 273 pound-feet of torque. That's more power and more torque than the 2-liter turbo last year, thanks to a different turbo, and more torque at lower RPMs than last year's VR6. Interestingly, it will also give you better 0 to 60 performance than last year's VR6, while maintaining 5,000 pounds of towing capability. It's mated to an 8-speed automatic transmission on this side of the engine bay, and fuel economy is pretty average for this segment. 23 miles per gallon if you choose front-wheel drive, 22 miles per gallon if you choose all-wheel drive, and the all-wheel drive model is the one that we're testing. I find the front seats to be comfortable and supportive for my body shape and size. I'm 6 feet tall, and it's no problem finding a good solid driving position, even if you prefer one that's a bit more upright, because even though they lowered the roof line and this has a panoramic moonroof, you can get surprisingly upright in the Atlas Cross Sport. On the downside, this seat is not as adjustable for people of different shapes and sizes. So no 4-way adjustable lumbar support, no extending thigh cushion, no adjustable lumbar support on the passenger seat, and those are all features you'll find on some of the competition. We have a tilt telescopic steering column with a reasonable range of motion, heated steering wheel feature right there, and 3-position memory for the driver's power seat. Extra rear seat room is definitely a reason to buy the Cross Sport over the average compact SUV. With that front seat comfortably adjusted for me, again at 6 feet tall, you can see I have about 7 inches of legroom left. Moving all the way over to the right side, I still have about 3-4 inches of legroom left with this front seat all the way back in its tracks, and the rear bench is notably wider than a Tiguan, a RAV4, or a CR-V, etc. We also have a floor that is almost completely flat in the back. It just has a little bit of a bump, so a bit more of an EV-like experience in here. Also big air vents, heated rear seats, USB charge-only ports, etc. back there. When Volkswagen created the Cross Sport from the Atlas, they didn't just delete the 3rd row. They deleted the 3rd row and then they moved the 2nd row about 3 inches further rearward. That gives this significantly more legroom back here in this 2nd row area, oddly, than you'll find in the larger 3-row Atlas. Of course, we just don't have that 3rd row there in the back. And that process is a little bit different than some of the other shrunken options, I guess you could say. So if you take a look at the Passport versus the Pilot of its generation, they did not move the seat further rearward, so you actually get very similar room as far as the legroom figures. Now here we don't find a 2nd row seat that slides forward and backward. That is kind of a cool feature that they retained from the Pilot in the Passport, and that does allow you to get an even bigger cargo area in the back. On the other hand, Volkswagen gives us a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back itself, and a padded center armrest right there, 2 features that I really love rather than the dangling out of the ceiling kind of shoulder belt. If you plan on putting child seats in the back, this is going to make it a lot easier to attach that child seat to the seat back. It's going to stay more centered in the seat. We have 2 sets of latch anchors on the outboard seating positions only, so no latch anchor for the center seat, top tethers for all 3. But thanks to the size and the width of this vehicle and the legroom, this is going to be a lot easier to put a rear-facing child seat in than in something like a Tiguan, RAV4, CR-V, etc. Also, if you need to combine adults and a child seat in the back, it would be an awful lot easier as an adult to sit between these 2 seats if you needed to. If you needed to put a rear-facing and a forward-facing seat and then sit back here with the kids, that's something you could actually do if you had narrow child seats in here, something that would not be quite possible in a RAV4. Folding the rear seats could be a bit more convenient. The only lever to fold them is right here on the inside. You pull it up, push the seat down, it is now completely flat, but actually a little bit lower than the cargo area. So as you push cargo in, it actually kind of drops down onto the rear seat backs, really maximizing that amount of cargo room you have. Also worth noting, if you want to unfold them, you have to pull the lever again and then lift them back up. Volkswagen gives us a nice tall opening hatch, but word of warning to taller viewers, the hatch latch right here is the lowest part of this. So if you're maybe 6'5", 6'6", you're going to end up bopping your head on that latch mechanism first. It's not going to be all that pleasant. But behind the hatch, we do find something very pleasant. It's a 40.3 cubic foot cargo area. I was able to squeeze 7 24-inch roller bags back here. I probably could have gone even more if this hatch didn't have this aggressive rake to it. And the 24-inch roller bags just can't be quite upright that close to the edge. But you can, of course, lay some bags down. There's a lot of cargo space back here and a lot of cargo width. Because this is again based on the 3-row Atlas, the cargo area opening is much wider than in a CR-V or a RAV4. And that's certainly going to make it easier to put boxier items inside. If you're looking for even more storage, you'll find it under the load floor, where we also find the temporary spare tire, and in our model, the subwoofer for the audio system. Rather surprisingly, Volkswagen does not give us a storage tray or anything like that under here like we do find in the Honda Passport. I would love to see one because it would help organize that cargo a bit better. Also, we don't find a two-stage load floor, so they could have given us a bit more room if they had moved this subwoofer perhaps to somewhere else and allowed us to lower that load floor just a bit. Now let's go for a spin around the interior. Up front, we have sliding sun visors for the driver and the front passenger, and lots of touch buttons. We have touch buttons for the map lights, touch buttons for the dome lights, touch slider controls for the large panoramic moonroof and its power shade. As you can see, that first pane opens, and it opens nice and wide, definitely wider than average for a panoramic moonroof. As you can see, even someone sitting pretty far back in that front seat, the glass is completely open over their heads. Definitely larger than we find in the new Mazda CX-90, and that other glass pane goes just about to the second row passenger's head. So nice big sheets of glass there. Back up front, we have height adjustable shoulder belts and height adjustable headrests, and from this angle you can also see those second row window shades. The design of the seats and the upholstery is very similar to the 3-row model, but of course there's a bit more flair since this is the more stylish version. We have blue accents on the inside of those center perforated sections, although you'll notice that the upper shoulder section and the side bolsters are also perforated, but they don't get that blue accenting. That really just helps dress things up. We have relatively aggressive side bolsters and seat bottom bolsters, something I also noticed in the regular Atlas, but I think they're maybe a bit more appropriate in this 2-row model. Moving over to the front doors, we have lots of soft touch materials. We have a stitched pleather insert right here, so that's imitation leather in the middle of the door, soft touch injection molded upper section of the door, and then harder plastics to improve durability down lower on the door, just as you'd expect. We don't have the imitation bamboo trim in this model like we found on the 3-row model, but we still have cross sport coming through this trim panel in the dashboard. So during the day, it's going to look just like it does now, with this sort of, 3D carbon fiber-esque imitation texture going on right there. But at night, you'll actually see cross sport coming through in the ambient lighting, and then there's some ambient lighting strips under that black plastic section of the dash. The upper portion of the dashboard is made from a soft touch injection molded material. We then have some stitched imitation leather in this midsection of the dash. Nice big bin style glove compartment. I had no problem fitting a tablet computer inside, one of those 11-inch tablet models. Moving back over to the middle of everything, we have a big center channel speaker in this model right up top. You can see that the carbon fiber-esque trim continues behind that new LCD right there. And then we have the controversial LCD. Actually, it's not the LCD itself that's controversial, it's the fact that at night you cannot see these touch sliders down here, so they're effectively invisible. And then there's kind of the fact that we have touch sliders in the first place because they're just a little bit more complicated to use. The power button is illuminated at night, but nothing else here. And I found during this week several times passengers in here at night would end up wanting to stab something up here on the instrument cluster, the infotainment display, and they'd sort of rest their thumb here and then start stabbing away, and then of course you end up adjusting your climate control or your volume. I just wish that that had been done a little bit differently, or at least had been illuminated, but the rest of the software is very intuitive, it's easy to use. I also appreciate the fact that we have some duplicate things that stay on the screen, so you can adjust your temperature down here, you can adjust it on the screen, you can see the temperature over here, and interacting with the seat heating controls, though, that is a little awkward. So you turn it on there, we close that, back there, you want to turn it off, you have to come over here, then touch that, then close that. You can't just keep touching that one option there. The seats are nicely ventilated though, that's a nice touch. Moving down from there, we have more of that shiny black plastic. I kind of wish that was something else. Ambient lighting is going to be under there. 2 big air vents. Buttons down here take you to some shortcuts in the system. So if you want to adjust the assist systems, there's a climate control shortcut, drive mode right there. That's the only way to adjust the drive mode in the vehicle. And then this is the parking support menu for the various different parking features. Down here we have a covered storage area for your smartphone, Qi wireless charging mat, 2 USB ports, lots more black plastic going on here, 2 big cup holders over there. I should mention that this plastic does not appear to scratch quite as easily as what we find in the Grand Cherokee, but I already notice a number of fine scratches all the way around the vehicle, and this doesn't have too many miles on it. Over here we have Volkswagen's joystick style shifter, so pull back there for drive, push forward for reverse, park is that button up there. Above the P, we find the engine start-stop buttons. That's how you turn the vehicle on and off. And then back here, we find the controls for the electric parking brake. There's also a storage area there, and then the larger storage compartment just under that center armrest. It's nice and deep and wide, and this armrest is covered in the same upholstery as the seats. VW gave this interior a lot of really thoughtful storage places. This is the storage area under the center console. You can see the upper section basically floats over that large storage area. We then have stitched imitation leather on either side to help pad your leg, and that wraps all the way around that opening to that large storage area. Moving over to the driver's side, we have a windshield projected heads-up display. That's what that large hole in the dash is for. Standard for 2024 is one of Volkswagen's highly configurable full LCD instrument clusters. This is easily one of my favorites in this segment because not only are the graphics attractive, we have that moving map display that you saw just a moment ago, something that we definitely don't find in all of the LCDs out there. And there are multiple ways to view the information on that LCD. You can also configure what's going on in each of these little side pods on the left and the right. You interact with the LCD via the buttons on the right side of the steering wheel. This is also where we find the heated steering wheel button, voice command button, and track forward-backward buttons. Then on the other side, we find the controls for the radar adaptive cruise control, as well as volume up and down. The steering wheel, it's basically the same one as the Atlas. It has sort of a flat bottom design up there, relatively minor sport grips on each side, but it's a nice, comfortable, thickly rimmed steering wheel. To the left of the steering wheel, we find another touch button bank. This is where we find the controls for the headlights, also the poor weather light. Again, not fog lights there. But I did find myself accidentally hitting the defogger button when all I really wanted to do was engage or disengage that all-weather light there. And then over here, we have the touch control for the rear defogger. Thankfully, VW did not pull a page out of the ID.Force playbook, so we still have 4 window switches on the driver's door. I've never been a fan of companies calling things sport simply when they're smaller, because out on the road, this feels an awful lot like the 3-row Atlas. It's not especially sportier. All the performance numbers are going to be very, very similar. 0 to 60 time, yes, it was a little bit faster, 7.2 seconds, so 1/10 of a second faster, primarily because this is about 200 pounds lighter than the 3-row model. But 60 to 0 stopping distances, basically the same at 117 versus 118 feet. Both of those numbers are solid scores for this segment. Something like a base Jeep Grand Cherokee or a 4Runner, they're not going to be especially swift 0 to 60, but the Honda Passport is pretty quick. It is notably quicker than this to 60 because of its really aggressive starting ratio on that 9-speed transmission. Also, the engine produces a bit more power. Of course, there's also the V8 available in the Grand Cherokee. There's a turbocharged Boxer engine available in the Outback, and you can get hybrid and turbo engines available in the Santa Fe as well. Now keep in mind, I'm talking about the current generation 2-row Santa Fe. The new 3-row Santa Fe would be a logical competitor to the 3-row Atlas, not the 2-row Atlas, so certainly keep that in mind. When it comes to handling, I would say this is solid, but it does come in just a step behind some. This has a lot of grip thanks to the 255 with tires, but it doesn't have a torque vectoring rear axle like we find in the Honda Passport. So handling in the Passport, I would say, is 1 notch above this. Certain versions of the Grand Cherokee will also be 1 notch above this because of its rear-wheel drive demeanor. I would expect that would also apply to the upcoming Mazda CX-70, but we haven't seen that one yet, so be sure and stay tuned for that at some point in the future. Drive quality actually is honestly pretty similar to the Blazer with the 2-liter turbo, but this is going to be swifter than the Blazer 2-liter turbo because that produces a significant amount less power. That was really more of a competitor to the original 2-liter turbo Atlas Cross Sport, not this model. When it comes to the actual score, I'm going to give this an A- because while it does give up some to the rear-wheel drive entries, I think that Volkswagen found a really great balance between ride and handling in the Atlas and in the Atlas Cross Sport. When it comes to ride quality, I think Volkswagen found a pretty decent balance with the Cross Sport. This is a bit firmer than the 3-row model, just as you'd expect, but it's not harsh, it's not punishing. And that's important because if you want to take this on a longer highway trip where I would say these seats are going to be very supportive and very comfortable, you don't want a really firm ride. And even in this model with the 21-inch wheels and the 255 with tires, you can handle being on a gravel road like we're on here for 30 minutes, 45 minutes if you needed to. If you're looking for something a little bit softer, a little bit more comfortable, you should take a look at something like the Murano or the Grand Cherokee or especially the Subaru Outback. The Outback is really softly sprung. The adaptive air suspension that's available in the Grand Cherokee is also going to be more comfortable, but most of the competition is actually going to have ride quality pretty similar to this. And I would say this is actually better than the current generation Honda Passport. In the Passport, even though it has been softened a little bit, the suspension is still on the firm side of things. Back out on the paved road, I measured 71 decibels at 50 miles an hour, meaning this is just about as quiet as the 3-row model. That's quite logical because most of the vehicle is the same. It just has a slightly larger cargo area in the back, and that doesn't appear to affect the cabin noise score much at all. On the fuel economy front, Volkswagen Star is not shining quite as brightly as in other areas. I've been averaging 18.7 miles per gallon in this model. Ostensibly, it's EPA rated for 22 miles per gallon combined. Bear in mind, of course, I have to drive up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass, and obviously that's going to be affecting the fuel economy because the Cross Sport is on the heavy side, depending on exactly what you want to compare this to. We, of course, also have the turbocharged engine, which is giving us a lot of low-end torque, but also burning a bit more fuel. If you want something more efficient, you can find a regular, naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine in something like an Outback or a Santa Fe. Generally speaking, those are going to give you better fuel economy, but you will also find hybrids and plug-in hybrids in this segment, not to mention some EVs if you want to try and make that kind of cross-shop. You can get the plug-in hybrid Grand Cherokee. It is going to be fantastically expensive compared to this. Full caution on that one. You could also compare this to something like a hybrid Santa Fe if you can find one of the last few on the lots before they move over to the next generation. And you could logically cross-shop this against the upcoming Crown Signia from Toyota. That's trying to be a mid-size thing in this same vein and the same vein as an Outback. Now, I should say that since the Outback is the #2 bestseller in this segment, the Outback and the Crown Signia are together very different than everything else because they're basically station wagons. Before we talk about pricing, I'd love to know what you guys think about this seemingly growing trend in the industry where a car company creates a new product, takes an existing name, and then just tacks on Sport or Grand or L or something along those lines and just recycles that name that way. Volkswagen is not the first company to do this, they won't be the last, but it does strike me as a little bit lazy. We see this a lot in the Jeep lineup. We have Cherokee, we have Grand Cherokee, even though it's not a Grander Cherokee. We have Wagoneer and Grand Wagoneer, even though that's kind of the same thing, only with fancier bits inside. We then have the L's tacked on there. We have Toyota with the Highlander and the Grand Highlander, just recycling that sort of thing. And then a lot of companies have either current products with Sport affixed to it, or they've done this in the past. You know, we had an Outback Sport at one point. We have an Atlas Cross Sport now because we have the Sport part and we have Cross in there. Because that means, I don't know what that means. Does that mean this is, I don't know, is this for, I don't even know. Why do we even have Cross in there? It's a crossover already. It's an SUV. We know that. Why do we need Cross in there? At any rate, am I just crazy? Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section. And now let's talk about pricing. Much like the 3-row Atlas, the Atlas Cross Sport has a relatively limited number of trim levels and standalone options compared to a lot of the competition. So the pricing range is a little bit narrower, and it's a little bit easier to find what you might be looking for on the dealer lot. But if you want a specific combination, you may not find that specific combination exists. Pricing will start at $38,410, go up to $53,700. This is a narrower range than some of the competition. And unlike some of the competition, this is actually a little bit less expensive than the top-end price on the 3-row Atlas. For some competitors, for some reason, you actually pay a little bit more for the 2-row version of basically the same vehicle. And that brings us along to the competition. What is the competition? Well, there are a decent number of options. We have the Grand Cherokee, that's the bestseller in this segment, the Subaru Outback, which is kind of a different thing to the Atlas, the Hyundai Santa Fe, which is being replaced with a 3-row model for 2024, so we're not going to talk too much about the Santa Fe here. The Ford Edge, which actually sold quite well last year, but has been discontinued by Ford, so we're not going to talk about that one either. The Chevy Blazer, it's still on sale, and it's getting a new version soon. Then we have the Honda Passport, logically a direct competitor. The Atlas Cross Sport is next in sales. Then we have the Nissan Murano, which is down towards the bottom of the list, and we don't know where the new Mazda CX-70 is going to land. But we do know the CX-70 is kind of an intriguing option, so we will talk about that in a little bit. First, of course, we have to talk about the Grand Cherokee. It is the bestseller, it's the highest volume competitor here, and it gets the most expensive, because it will go up to $80,195 just for the 2-row model with a naturally aspirated V6 engine, because you cannot get the 2-row model with the V8 any longer. The Grand Cherokee may be a mid-size two-row SUV, and in the lower-end trims it may compete very directly with the Atlas Cross Sport, but intrinsically it's a very different vehicle. It's a rear-wheel drive-based vehicle. We have much more of an off-road focus. You can get things like an adaptive air suspension. You can get true locking differentials. You can get a 2-speed transfer case. Everything together means that regardless of which four-wheel drive system you get in the Grand Cherokee, and there are several to choose from, it's going to go places that the Atlas simply cannot go. The design of the Atlas's drivetrain is substantially similar to most of the competition. It's a front-wheel drive-based design, but it can send power to the rear by locking a clutch pack in the center coupling. However, it cannot fully lock that clutch pack, so it's not going to act like a locking transfer case would in, say, a Grand Cherokee. And then it doesn't have a mechanical locker on the rear axle, and the rear axle is just not capable of as much torque and as much power as we find in the Grand Cherokee design. So fairly different priorities there. The Atlas is clearly a much better value than the Grand Cherokee. The Grand Cherokee gets pretty darn expensive, especially if you want those extra features. It also is not going to be as efficient, and that's definitely an area where the Atlas will excel. Because of the Grand Cherokee's off-road mission, it ends up being heavier, less aerodynamic, higher off the ground, etc. All of that translates to poorer fuel efficiency. If we're talking about the low-end Grand Cherokees, I think the interior in the Atlas is nicer. If we're talking about the top-end Grand Cherokees, the interior in the Grand Cherokee is nicer. So kind of a even split there. Also kind of a different vehicle is the next competitor, and that's the Subaru Outback. And that's because the Outback starts a lot less than the Atlas. It also has a lot less power, and because it's basically a lifted station wagon. It starts at $30,240, and that's going to get you a naturally aspirated 4-cylinder engine under the hood. If you want a turbo, it is available, but you're going to be paying considerably more than that base price for it. And it will go up to $44,140. Definitely less than the Atlas, but arguably you're not getting quite as much as you do in the Atlas. The cargo area is not as big. It's certainly longer, but it's not quite as big. And the off-road ability in the Outback, which is definitely often touted, mainly has to do with the ground clearance that we find in it, and some software programming as well. The Outback is not going to be as off-road capable as a Grand Cherokee or something like a Land Rover Defender, etc. It just doesn't have that same kind of four-wheel drive capability. The Outback also can't send really that much more power to the rear axle than the Atlas can. It often just comes down to ground clearance, software, and tire selection as far as which one is going to be the most off-road capable for you. However, I do love the suspension tuning in the Outback. It's the kind of suspension that very easily handles broken pavement, off-road duty, etc. The Outback is a really great design if you are a little bit more interested in outdoorsy activities as well. If you frequently put bicycles or kayaks on top of your vehicle, the lower roof line in the Outback definitely is going to be an advantage, but it's not quite the same thing. Definitely the same thing is the Honda Passport. The Passport is essentially the two-row version of the previous generation Pilot. And that previous generation Pilot is the important thing to keep in mind. The Atlas certainly feels more fresh than the Passport. Whether we're talking about the exterior design or the gadgets and gizmos on the inside, or simply the dashboard design itself, the Volkswagen simply looks more luxurious and more modern. I don't care for the Atlas Cross Sport's dash trim structure quite as much as I like the imitation wood in the regular Atlas, but I still think it feels more modern and more premium than what we find in the Honda. The Passport has an excellent all-wheel drive system, however. It has essentially Acura's super handling all-wheel drive system, which means it has limited slip and torque vectoring functionality on the rear axle, and it can command a much more complete lock of the center coupling. So as far as off-road capability goes, the Passport is next level over the Atlas. The downside is its age. It is really starting to show it. Even though they've tweaked things here or there, the exterior design and the interior design just doesn't feel as fresh and modern. And I really love the fact that with this generation of Atlas, they did give it a pretty thorough refresh. It gets a restyled exterior and a restyled interior, so even though the bones are not the most modern, it certainly feels more modern than the Passport. On the other hand, the Passport, of course, does give you that V6 engine if that's something that you're interested in. Also, all-wheel drive is standard on the Passport, which logically accounts for most of the price difference in the base trim. It also starts in EXL trim, so the trim ladder is a little bit different than in the three-row Pilot. Chevy's Blazer is definitely focusing on style. Whether you care for it or not, that's kind of a different question, but it is definitely highly styled. Some might even say overstyled. On that front, I have to say I do prefer the look on the Atlas and the Atlas Cross Sport. Price tag-wise, this is a bit tricky. The Blazer is going to be more expensive starting, $43,690, and it's going to go up to about $3,000 more expensive than the Atlas. But you're probably going to get a decent discount on the Chevy dealer lot. Discounts off MSRP are pretty normal over there and a little bit less normal with the Atlas Cross Sport. So real world, out the door, comparably equipped, it's probably going to be in the same neighborhood as the Atlas. What's not going to be in the same neighborhood as the Atlas is the practicality. The Blazer's more flowing design means that on the inside it feels an awful lot smaller than the Atlas and the Atlas Cross Sport. You'll really notice that in the cargo area and in the second row. If you're interested in the Blazer or you're interested in a good deal, you should know that there's a new generation Blazer coming out soon. So if you want the latest in Blazer tech and Blazer styling, you might want to wait for the new one. Or if you want a really good deal on the outgoing Blazer, you want to wait till that one starts showing up in dealer inventory, because they're probably going to want to get rid of the older Blazer at that point. The next one we should talk about here is the new Mazda CX-70, because it's pretty different than the average. Much like the Cross Sport, the CX-70 is a two-row version of Mazda's larger three-row SUV. And that means that we get inline-six turbocharged engines and rear-wheel drive. There's also going to be a plug-in hybrid if you're interested. So most likely 280 to 340 horsepower in the inline-six engines, probably about 325 horsepower with the plug-in hybrid. Now, the important thing to know is that at the moment, Mazda has not released a lot of information on the CX-70, but we do know what it looks like on the inside and on the outside. Again, basically shrunken CX-90. And we know that there's going to be that plug-in hybrid system. If you're looking for a plug-in hybrid, we have the Grand Cherokee, we have the CX-70, but you can bet the CX-70 is going to be less expensive. I would also bet that the CX-70 is going to be a bit more fun. As far as on-road driving dynamics, my guess is that the CX-70 is going to be the king of this particular segment. The Grand Cherokee is definitely fun to drive, but it is a little on the heavy side because of that off-road mission. We aren't going to see that in the CX-70, and oddly enough, the CX-70 is going to be delivering a decent amount more power, at least for the moment. I expect the Grand Cherokee is going to get the inline-six Hurricane engine at some point soon, but we aren't getting that for 2024. It may be just a little bit more of a wait. We don't know any pricing for the CX-70, but my guess is it's probably going to be somewhere around the $45,000 to $55,000 range, just like the rest of the entries here, and the plug-in hybrid system could be between $5,000 and $7,000 more, but some of those details remain to be seen. It's also worth noting that we do know the CX-70 hybrid is going to get an actual spare tire. So if you want a hybrid, you want some extra capability, you want some extra performance, and you want a spare, this is really going to be a solid option. Just know that it's probably going to be smaller on the inside than the Atlas Cross Sport. Again, no official dimensions, but I have been able to sit in it. Be sure and check out that video. And the inside definitely feels a little bit tighter than Passport and Atlas Cross Sport because we have that big long hood up front. All right, it's time to sound off in that comment section. Let me know what you would do if you're shopping in this segment. Are you Team Passport? Are you Team Atlas? Or are you waiting for that CX-70? Those are perhaps the most interesting three options in this segment at the moment. The Grand Cherokee, it's kind of in a different category, again, because of that off-road capability, but certainly it's here in the shopping mix. Let me know what you would do down there. I have to admit, I might wait for that CX-70 plug-in hybrid. I'll see all of you next week.